Hey everyone, welcome to our lesson this morning. It is so great to spend time with you this morning and just hang out for a bit. I want to start today by telling you a quick story about traveling. And I think I've shared before here with you that I love to travel. I love going and visiting new places. There's a few reasons that I love it so much. One, I love to just learn about other places. And you can, I read books, you can watch documentaries and travel programs, but until you really go and walk the streets and meet some people, you don't have the same appreciation for it. So I love that. I love learning about other places. I also love experiencing and tasting the unique foods of other places. So like when my wife and I were in the Czech Republic a while back, having some of these pastries that they would cook on the street over these flames, and it was just amazing, right? Other foods too, different things, regionally places eat different things slightly, and it's so good to experience and try out. Sometimes though, when we travel, we have maybe uncomfortable experiences. Maybe at the time it felt really awkward, and then afterwards you're like, oh, that's kind of funny. So I want to share with you a quick story about one of those times, because I've had them a bunch. Almost always they relate to language. And here's where it happened one time. A few years back, I was in Turkey. It was a real quick trip to Turkey. Mostly I was in Greece, and then we popped over to Turkey, as one does, just for a couple days. And while we were there, it was me and my wife and my parents. And we're walking along the street by our hotel, and we see this like bread shop, right? You might think bakery, but if I said bakery, you're probably picturing like donuts and all kinds of stuff. They did one thing. They made one particular type of flatbread, and we thought, well, we should get some bread for dinner. That would be great. So we settle into our hotel, and then we come out as the place is opening, and there's a lineup for it around the block. It is super long, but we're like, if it's that long of a line, maybe it's really good. So we figured out, okay, so some needed to go to the grocery store to get groceries, and someone needed to stand in this line. Somehow, I ended up being the person to stand in the line. Whatever, no big deal. I'm used to standing around. I can do it. Here was the deal. I don't speak a word of Turkish, all right? And everybody else in the line with me, not one of them spoke a word of English. So whatever, it's cool. We're not really hanging out, but I'm there, part of the group, the only foreigner. At least I thought, who knows, some people could be from other parts of the world. But to me, I'm looking at it going, I think everybody else here is local. So I'm standing in this line, and it's moving super slow. It takes a long time to get up to the front. And after about, 30 minutes of standing there, I get about halfway. And then this kid comes out. This kid's maybe about, 9. And he comes out and he starts asking questions of the crowd. I thought he's asking, who's here for bread? I thought, this is a weird question because, aren't we all? But whatever, I thought, okay, he's asking about who's here for bread. So I put my hand up, right? Because I want bread. I want to make sure if they're counting how many loaves do we need to make, I want to make sure I'm in this list. So I put my hand up. He goes, and he kind of, everyone around me is putting their hand up. So I'm like, okay, I guess we put our hands up, right? I don't want to miss out on the bread, right? That's why I'm here. So I put my hand up. He then ducks away inside the store, and then he comes back out, and he's handing out these cups of stuff. I'm like, wait a minute, I thought we were here for bread. What's going on? This is not oh no. Did I just tell him I wanted whatever he's serving? And now, sure enough, he then tries to hand me a cup. I don't want the cup. I don't know what's in the cup. I don't know where the cup has been. It's a weird thing to me. I'm almost like, no, I can't. I rejected the cup. And he's looked at me really confused. Like, but you said he could tell. I can't reason with this guy. This guy's unreasonable. Normally I'm not. Anyways, he goes back inside, hands out all the rest of the cups, and then goes back in, and never see him again until I get to the window. Finally, it's my turn, and I'm like, I'd watched people go walk out with the size of breads. I'm like, okay, so I want 3, right? So I hold up, 3 fingers, I like 3 bread, and they give me 3 bread, and all the time they're looking at me weird, like. And then I realize I see in the corner of the shop the kid again, and he's telling the people, and he's pointing at me like he's the one. He's the reason we went. I'm like, ah! So I take my bread, I give him money, which was like not even $1. It was super cheap. And I walk out of there, I'm going, not only that, I had to give him a big bill because that's all I had. I'm like, this is so weird. I'm getting like tons of change back. I expected them to throw me out, but they're super cool. And I leave and I'm like, this is so awkward. This is so uncomfortable. I'm like the weirdo foreigner who doesn't like the Jews apparently. And I go back to, and I just like, I don't want to show my face there. I'm so embarrassed, but I got my bread, which was, by the way, amazing, right? And it was a super uncomfortable experience that really, I look back on now and go, that's kind of funny. I'm the idiot who accidentally ordered juice that I didn't want. But at the time, it was a little bit uncomfortable because I just didn't know all the customs. I didn't know that the kid was offering juice, and I didn't know even how to order the bread. I'm like awkwardly in the window. I just didn't really know even how much I didn't know at the time, right? And sometimes that happens when we travel. And then we come home and as we get off the plane, right? And we're met in the airport by these people with badges and uniforms, and a sign says Canada Customs. We're like, customs? Customs are the things that certain people groups do that they kind of just, like giving gifts at Christmas is a custom, right? We have a lot of holiday customs. But yet sometimes we use the word customs and we mean people in uniforms who ask you if you're bringing sausage back to the country, right? But what we want to talk about this morning is a little bit about customs and traditions and things that other countries do or even other families do, right? Not everyone I know takes their shoes off when they enter the house. I've always done that. Is that just a custom? We do it so we don't get dirt in the house. But for some people, it's more of a custom to leave your shoes on. Here's a family custom I married into. I didn't know this at the time when I was dating my wife, but apparently in her side of the family, there's a little bit of a custom of giving toast at a wedding. And you might think, I've been to weddings before. Lots of people give toasts. Yes, if you think of toasts as a speech. No, at our wedding, we were given a piece of toast, right? And it's a custom to give a toast at the wedding. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, toast. Hilarious. Love it. On we went, right? Your family has customs, things that you do that you enjoy, that are unique to you, that are just the way done. Well, when we interact with the Bible, a lot of times we come up against customs that are foreign to us, right? Which shouldn't be surprising. It's a different culture, right? Separated not just by distance, but by like a few thousand years, right? Things were very different then, right? Different culture, different values, different, just so much different. And as a result, we'll read things that we go, it's just hard for us to connect with because it's not how we do things today. It's not even necessarily today in 2021. We don't always look at it with the same cultural lens as other people in the world. Maybe not even other people in our town. And so as we come to Scripture, we've got all this different customs and ideas in our minds, and we have to understand what's going on there. And so our story for today really relates to a customary thing, a way of doing life in those days that our first reaction is, well, that's wrong. I'm not trying to say that the Bible always shares us those customs as saying that's how we should do things today. In fact, no, it's not how we should do things today. But we can still learn from it. And I just don't want the customs to be like too weird for us to get it. So here's what we need to do. We're going to get into our Bible story and understand what it means for us today. And just know there's some weird customs in there. I'm going to do my best to try and explain them a little bit. But first, I have a question for you. What would happen to the Bible if you took out the 8th book? I'll say that one more time. What would happen to the Bible if you took out the 8th book? It would be ruthless. I wanted so hard to say that with a straight face. Anyways, let's move on, all right? Because we're going to talk about Ruth today. And Ruth is an awesome story because it actually points us really well to Jesus in a couple different ways. All right, so let's get into it. So first off, the story doesn't start with Ruth. No, the story starts with a woman named Naomi. And she had a husband named Elimelech. And they lived in Bethlehem. You probably recognize that. They lived in there. This happened again in the time of right around the time of the Judges. Okay, we've been talking about them a lot lately, right? So as the Israelites were entering the Promised Land, but there was no king yet, right? Moses had died, all that generation, and a series of people rose up, used by God, called by God, to bring relief to the people of Israel, to help them deal with the oppressive forces around them, other nations that were attacking them. We call these people judges, okay? And in that time, so the time before there was a king, we have in Bethlehem a severe famine, shortage of food. So Elimelech and his wife Naomi, they decide to move their family. It's the two of them, and they have 2 boys. So they're a family of 4, and they move to another country, where in search of food, in search of jobs, just in search of a new life. And so they establish themselves there. The boys grow up. They find wives. One of their sons marries a woman named Ruth. The other son marries a different woman. And she is a little less important in this story. All right? So 2 boys marry 2 women, and things are going great until they weren't. See, eventually, Elimelech dies. The father dies. So first Elimelech passes away. Then the 2 sons. Now what you've got left is you've got Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and the other one. And Naomi decides, you know what? There's nothing for me here. I'm going to move back to Bethlehem. So what does she do? She decides to move back to Bethlehem. She just gets up, packs up what little she had. Now, here's where we bump into the first cultural custom. As a woman in those days, you can't own property. You have no rights of any kind. You're really becoming, in some ways, even though you're an old woman, you're kind of an orphan. You're on your own. So without being in a community with her own people, she's got no one. So she decides, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem where I might have some relatives alive, someone who will take care of me. So she starts heading back. Now, the daughters-in-law protest, not to her leaving, they protest her going alone. They both say, we're with you, Naomi, we're going to go with you, but she stops them. She says to them, no, you're young, stay here, find new husbands, continue your life here. Well, that sounds like a nice plan. Ruth, however, rejects it. She's like, no, where you go, I'm with you, no matter what. The other one is like, see you later, okay? Good idea, Naomi. I'm going to go find me a new man, and because otherwise I got nothing here. So she goes back to her home, and Ruth and Naomi head to Bethlehem. Now remember, Ruth at this point, she's from Moab. Like she doesn't know the cultures, she doesn't know the customs, she doesn't know the people. She knows one thing. She knows Naomi. She knows that her mother-in-law needs her. She knows that she's got nothing to go back to, nothing to go forward. She just knows wherever Naomi's going, I'm going. And a whole lot of faith and trust that it'll work out. All right, we don't exactly know what that faith and trust is. We don't know that she's trusting necessarily that God is over her. We don't know where her faith is at. We just know that she's in. Some idea that she's trusting God, but mostly she's just in with Naomi. So off they go, back to Bethlehem, right? Well, or to Bethlehem for the first time, whether you're looking at it from Naomi's perspective or Ruth's. And they get there. They start establishing themselves. Ruth finds a field with grain. Now here's another custom to be aware of. Part of the Israelite law was that there's certain parts of your field that you wouldn't harvest. So if you had a field of wheat or barley or some kind of grain, you would leave the corners. You would leave sections along the edge so that widows, foreigners, orphans, people in real need could come along and gather those bits. So what does Ruth do? She takes advantage of this custom. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that like she starts doing what the law set out to do, and she starts collecting in those areas. Well, Boaz takes a man named Boaz who owned the field, took notice of her, right? How that exactly looked, all we know is this. He sees that she's doing it. We get the idea he fancied her. right? He thought, oh, who's this foreigner? She's kind of cute. Let's help her out. So he gives instruction to the people who work for him, hey, you know what? Leave a little extra so that new girl can get it. So anyways, he fancies her. Time goes on. Ruth comes home. She starts telling everything to Naomi about how she was, treated really well and given lunch and was helped out in many ways. And Naomi goes, yeah, that Boaz is a good guy. He's actually a distant relative of ours. And here's another cultural custom. Again, because women couldn't own property, they had so few rights in those days, they actually kind of were part of the property. So here's what happens in Canada, right? And a lot of the world today. If someone passes away, chances are whatever they owned gets passed on to someone else. They might have a will that gives the directions for that. We often call that an inheritance, right? Now, you receive an inheritance. That's great. It's property. It might be a car, might be a house, it might be some money that was in the bank. It's not going to be people. But in that day, part of it was this. If someone had a wife who was left behind, or, servants, they would be part of the bundle of property. And so what happened was they had another part tied to that culture because there was no son to pass it on to, or grandson to pass it on to. A distant relative could buy the lot, could buy all that was left over, and then decide what to do with it. And so part of that purchasing was related to the idea of being of redemption. You would redeem it. So you could buy people, you could set them free, you could bring them into your household, you could decide what to do with them. So what Naomi told Ruth is, yes, he's a relative of ours. Let's see if he's willing to redeem us, to buy what was left, which would include us, and see if. But first there was. So Ruth goes to town. She goes back, spends more time in his fields, gets to know him better. Eventually, she makes it known to him that she would be interested in being married to him, that he should maybe buy the property and marry her. So Boaz tells her, there's another who's closer. We have another relative who gets the right of first dibs. This is not quite the wording he used, okay? That's how I always think of it. It's like first dibs. He's got the right to kind of say, hey, I want all of Elimelech's property. I will buy it. I don't know who the money goes to, but he had the right to purchase it. So, okay. So, Boaz says, I got to talk to him first and see if he wants it. So they set up an arrangement. They set up a meeting. Now, all the business in those days weren't done necessarily in courthouses or, there was not like an office, and there's no real estate office, nothing like that. Instead, what they do is they met outside at the city gate, right? They would sit down for a chit chat. A lot of times, culturally, that's where the older gentlemen would gather and they would talk about life, what's going on. They'd do business, they'd take care of whatever needed to get done. There's always witnesses around, people who could observe it, make sure everything was official and legal. And so they sit down and they chat about it, right? So Boaz explains the situation to this other relative. And he says, hey, have you heard about Elimelech? He's got all this property. He's got all these goods. Do you want to buy it? The guy gets kind of excited, like, yeah, I should. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. And then he goes, well, there's a catch. His widow's still alive and you need to take care of her. More than that, he has a daughter-in-law. And if you buy the property and she becomes your wife, any children you have with her, well, they would be Elimelech's grandkids, not really your own, and the inheritance would travel down through them. And he starts laying out all the legal and customary requirements of the day. And this relative goes, you know what? Second thought, it's not really the good deal I was looking for. I think I'm going to pass. Okay. All right, everyone's like, you heard him say he doesn't want it. Everyone's like, yeah, we heard him say. So Boaz goes, that's just great. Now, I want to make sure I get this detail right because it's also kind of weird to me and I don't understand it. And as much as I've read and tried to figure it out, I still don't know that I quite understand it. But, right, when the other gentleman said no, okay, then Boaz explained that he was next in line. So, okay, if you pass, then you got to know that I'm gonna buy it. And I got to be okay with that. Everything's up front here. No questions asked or nothing shady is going on, right? And in front of all the elders, they all heard it. They finalized the deal. And then it was done. But then there was this thing, and the part part of how they arranged it is they'd take their sandal and they'd do like a sandal swap, right? Which is really weird. I don't like touching other people's sandals or socks or anything like that. I don't tell you, like, I don't mind taking mine off. I just don't want to wear anyone else's, right? That's such a weird thing. But then they would do this sandal swap and they didn't give out rings then or anything. It's like, oh, here's this sandal, you could say. And they did all of that, and all the elders of the town were around. They all witnessed it. It was all good. It was all set. It was all done. And at that moment on, Boaz then became the overseer, the one who would care for all of Elimelech's property until there was an heir that it could be handed off to, right? He was taking that responsibility on. Now that meant taking Ruth into his household. And so he decided at that moment to marry, well, he decided beforehand that if he had the opportunity, he wanted to marry her. He and Ruth got married then. And the reason I think this story is in the Bible because of two reasons. And the first one is what happened in the generations next. So Boaz married Ruth. They had a son named Obed. Obed, not a common name in Canada. I can't say I've met an Obed, but never in Canada, right? They had a son named Obed. Obed had he would go on to have other sons. Eventually, right, he had a son named Jesse. Jesse, you may have heard of, both in terms of your world, but also in the Bible. Jesse's pretty well known because Jesse had a number of sons himself, quite a few actually. And the youngest is pretty significant. He was a guy named David, a shepherd actually. A shepherd who became a giant slayer, who also became one of the more notable kings of Israel. Yeah, that king, David. So you have Ruth and Boaz. They have a son who has a son who becomes the king of the whole nation of Israel. One of the greatest kings ever known. And eventually, then you go down generations, go all the way down the list, and then you come at this other boy named Jesus. All because Ruth decided to show kindness and care for Naomi, to trust that it would work out, to move to Bethlehem, to, pursue what seemed just like the right thing to do at the time. Yeah, trusting that there was a God who was going to look out, but mostly just trusting that she knew that she could care for Naomi. That kindness went on. Boaz decided to show kindness to Ruth, decided to marry her, and eventually it all led, became part of God's big story plan for Jesus. But here's another thing. It goes back to that term, redeemer. We don't use that word a lot necessarily today in our world, in our society. It's kind of a weird one, but to buy something back, to almost is like cashing in on something. Sometimes we'll talk about redeeming coupons, where you take a little slip of paper and you go like, I'd like 50 cents off that cheese, please. Right? Well, it's not quite like that. We often talk about Jesus being our redeemer. He's the one who buys us out of slavery to sin, who buys us out of our despair and our lostness and helps us find a new life in God. And Jesus does that very important work for you, for me, for all of us, and we just need to receive it and accept it. And so, in a way, this custom of redeeming and redemption is a really important part of how you and I connect to God. Because we recognize that Jesus did the work that we couldn't do. He took care of the way we were trapped and lost in sin so that we could be close to God. And that is a very good thing that you and I get to live out today. Hey, there's a new verse for us that I want to bring to your attention. It comes to us from Hebrews 11:6. And we've talked about faith a lot. It is an important, not just word concept, it's really a key aspect of our identity, to be people of faith. But it says in Hebrews 11:6, it says this, without faith it is impossible to please God. He rewards those who earnestly, I almost said eternally, but he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Let me say that one more time. Without faith it is impossible to please God. He rewards those who earnestly seek him. And that's our challenge for us today, just to seek after God and enjoy the reward of his presence in our life. Guys, have an awesome week, and we'll connect again real soon.